What happens when an entire generation looks at the world they're inheriting and feels, well, utterly robbed of their future? It's a massive question, and honestly, it's the spark igniting one of the most fascinating geopolitical shifts of our entire era. Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so incredibly excited to guide you through this today because it's a topic that's actively reshaping the world as we speak. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, our explainer focuses on a massive, unprecedented wave of youth-led political change that is just sweeping across Asia. You'll often hear it called the Asian Spring or Asia's Gen Z revolutions. And we're going to explore exactly how this specific demographic is fundamentally altering the global political landscape from the ground up.
Here is our roadmap for today. First up, we'll cover the Asian Spring itself. Second, the drivers of discontent. Third, the domino effect. Fourth, a new protest playbook. And finally, we'll look at electoral activism.
All right, Section 1, the Asian Spring. A generation awakens.
So, what is the Asian Spring? Basically, it refers to a whole series of Generation Z-led anti-government protests that have been erupting across Asia since the early 2020s, and they are a direct response to some deep-seated issues: systemic corruption, blatant nepotism, and severe economic mismanagement. And listen, these aren't just your standard weekend demonstrations. They are leading to massive, sweeping reforms and actual regime changes. In fact, the July 2024 protest in Bangladesh, analysts are widely citing that as the world's very first successful Gen Z revolution.
Moving on to Section 2, Drivers of Discontent, the trifecta of anger.
And this brilliantly illustrates the why behind it all. These movements are fundamentally driven by real, intense material hardship. A 2024 ICES study on Southeast Asian youth found that a staggering 89% of respondents are actively worrying about unemployment and a looming recession. Almost 9 out of 10. When young people look ahead right now, they just see a bleak economic future, widening wealth gaps, and a post-pandemic recovery that, quite frankly, has simply left them behind.
Now combine that deep economic anxiety with some seriously stark political inequalities. Take Indonesia in August 2025. Lawmakers there actually pushed for a monthly housing allowance of over $3,000. Let that sink in for a second. That is 10 times Jakarta's minimum wage. All while the youth are facing mass layoffs and property tax hikes. This intense, unavoidable friction between ruling class perks and a struggling public is exactly what turns quiet frustration into roaring street protests.
And we saw literally the exact same catalyst play out in Timor-Leste just a month later, in September 2025. Lawmakers there proposed a $4.2 million budget to buy 65 luxury Toyota SUVs for members of parliament, complete with lifetime pensions. This was happening in a country grappling with incredibly high inequality, malnutrition, and severe youth unemployment. Naturally, university students marched against these greedy lawmakers. It just shows how elite privilege has become the absolute ultimate flashpoint.
But it gets even more deeply personal in Nepal. There, public anger really crystallized around what protesters dubbed the Nepo kids. Viral images were absolutely everywhere on social media, showing a government minister's son just flaunting luxury goods. And why did this hit such a nerve? Because the average Nepali makes under $1,500 a year. It's this perfect micro-narrative that makes massive macroeconomic issues feel totally visceral. Blatant nepotism and the perceived impunity of these elite children basically acted like a match dropped straight into a powder keg.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, the domino effect, a contagious uprising.
The 2024 Bangladesh July uprising is a perfect example because it escalated incredibly rapidly. It literally started in June as a simple protest against a 30% government job quota for descendants of war veterans, which the youth viewed as totally nepotistic. But by July, following a brutal, violent government crackdown and an unprecedented internet blackout, it just exploded. And by August 5th, a full-blown non-cooperation movement actually forced the Prime Minister to resign and flee the country entirely.
And then, just a year later in September 2025, this kind of unrest just cascaded across the entire region. It's wild to track. On September 4th, Nepal bans 26 social media platforms. Bam! By September 8th, Nepalese Gen Z takes to the streets. A week later on the 15th, the Timor-Leste SUV protests erupt. And then by September 21st, the Philippines sees the trillion peso march against flood control corruption. It is an intense, undeniable domino effect spanning thousands of miles in a matter of mere weeks.
And here is the most crucial takeaway. These are not just performative marches.
They are highly, highly effective. In Sri Lanka back in 2022, the president and PM resigned. In Bangladesh, the PM fled. In Nepal, the PM resigned, and they forced the social media ban to be lifted. In Timor-Leste, those luxury cars and pensions completely canceled. And in Indonesia, the controversial perks were revoked. These uprisings aren't just making noise, they are achieving massive structural regime changes.
Which brings us to Section 4, a new protest playbook, digital and defiant.
Now, what's really interesting about this is exactly how Gen Z is organizing. It's totally different from past generations. They rely heavily on digital coordination and deeply creative symbolism. For instance, protesters across Asia, all the way from Indonesia to the Philippines, have actually adopted the flag of the Straw Hat Pirates from the Japanese anime One Piece. They're using it as a shared regional symbol of liberation and defiance against oppressive systems. It's amazing because it uniquely unites a massive movement across completely different countries and languages through pop culture.
But they also use incredibly poignant local symbolism. In Kathmandu, Nepal, students literally carried their school textbooks during the demonstrations. Why? To symbolize the absolute futility of education in a system that is utterly dominated by nepotism. It's such a powerful micronarrative. It visually communicates their frustration that, hey, no amount of hard work or merit even matters if you don't have the right political connections. It's a highly visible, deeply creative way to protest the death of meritocracy.
All right, our final section, Section 5, the electoral activism alternative. A different path.
Because, street protests are not the only way this generation is making its voice heard. An analysis of the political climate in India points out an alternative perspective. It notes, quote, young Indians have simply migrated from street activism to digital and electoral activism where their voice matters more and their protest doesn't get hijacked by professional anarchists. This is a really important counternarrative. It suggests that a lack of street protests doesn't necessarily mean the youth are disillusioned. They might just be strategically channeling their energy elsewhere.
This electoral alternative basically argues that youth support can absolutely be driven by a government's actual performance. Things like welfare initiatives, infrastructure, and national digital empowerment. The idea here is that when young people feel that institutional avenues are actually functioning and delivering for them, they naturally migrate away from street disruptions and instead utilize the ballot box to enact their change. It's a completely valid alternative manifestation of activism that focuses on working within the system.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. Will the future of youth political power be decided out on the burning streets or at the digital ballot box? Gen Z is proving without a doubt that they have the power to topple governments and completely rewrite policies. How they choose to wield that immense power moving forward is absolutely going to shape the geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.